I'm now working on a multi-partner project looking at school exclusions and how to provide better education for kids at risk of exclusion. And I would hazard that those relationships have something very fundamental to do with the solution. I'm looking forward to quizzing AKALA at the end on his ideas for how to improve this. But for now, it's my pleasure to introduce him to talk to us. AKALA, please come on.
Good morning, everyone. How you doing? I'm a bit of a walker. I'm just waiting for my slides to come up on the screen. But how's everyone feeling this morning? Everyone all right? Good. Excellent. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about natives, about my own experience in school, and what I think can be derived from some of my experiences, both in traditional education and outside. So we have a talk here on the power of education. This is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire. It's part memoir, part political essay, part social history of the British Empire. And what it does is it takes anecdotal experiences from my life, both positive and negative, and tries to place them in the context of British society. Namely to give some flavour and some understanding to the British class system on one hand, and the British Empire and its racial legacies on the other hand. It's no secret that the vast majority of children on free school meals don't do particularly well in school. My parents were teenage parents. British African Caribbean children, or children of Caribbean origin in particular, don't do so well in British state schools. That isn't the case in the Caribbean itself, which we'll get to in a bit. But on paper, all the statistics were there for me to fail in school. Yeah, me and all four of my siblings all got 10 GCSEs. I took my maths GCSE a year early. I went to the Royal Institution of Mathematics masterclasses. We all did fairly well in school. And I'm going to try and explain some of the reasons why, but some of the obstacles that I think were put in our way in a sense. My formal education at school, this is the first book I wrote long before Natives when I was 9 in Anne Taylor's class. I'm putting this up here just to show off. Why I was so obsessed with Switzerland, I have no idea. It's the story of two young boys that run away from home and they run away to Switzerland. I have no idea why Switzerland, in hindsight. But this book is exemplary, or exemplifies rather, the impact of great teachers. This particular teacher, my happiest memory in primary school was being in this teacher's class. Yeah? And I wrote this book. Even now I read it and I can't believe I was 9 when I wrote it. I struggle to write stuff this good now. And so, shout out to Anne Taylor. So I'm not suggesting in any way that my experience in school was entirely negative, that all of my teachers were bad. I had some great experiences in school and it broadened my horizons in a number of ways. However, not all of my experiences in school were positive. When I was 7, I was put in a special needs group for kids who don't speak English. I was reading Lord of the Rings at home, so clearly I didn't have a problem with English. My parents were not told, so clearly the school understood that or this particular teacher understood, that I did not have a problem with the command of the English language. Because if she thought that I needed special educational provision, she would have come to see my parents, told them that, and I would have been put into this group. But I wasn't. I was taken out of mainstream schooling. They gave us hot chocolate and biscuits in the special education group, so as a 7-year-old I obviously didn't want to leave. But it was only years later I realised I was being rewarded for failure. Yeah? I was too smart for my own good, or at least for this particular teacher, for somebody like me, and I needed to be kind of brought back down to size. And luckily for me, I had, as you're going to see in a minute, a special educational provision, and it was actually the staff from that special educational provision discovered that I'd been taken out of mainstream schooling for months. Told my mum, I didn't tell my mum before I was in trouble, so I was keeping it to myself. Told my mum went down to school, shouted a little bit, needless to say I was removed from said group. But what I tried to do in Natives, both in primary and secondary school, I had some really positive experiences with teachers and some really, really negative ones, like the special needs group. There was another teacher in secondary school that I can't go into, but I try and put that in the wider context of British society. And what we looked at, or what we think about, is if in a class hierarchical society, in a society in which the education system, as it began, as poor people in particular began to come into the British education system, it was not set up to turn the average kid from Salford in Manchester into an astrophysicist. People were being educated to do particular jobs at particular sectors of the economy. And this is without the added complication of people coming here from Britain's former colonies. What then happens in the post-war period is essentially the aspirational, even if they weren't middle class, but people from the Caribbean and Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent that wanted to do well, that believed, Britain provided certain opportunities for their children that maybe they didn't have back home, or a whole host of reasons to migrate to Britain. And ironically, had a sense that they would have opportunities in the UK that they wouldn't have had back home. But they came into a society that was already hierarchical. So what does that mean in terms of school? We used to have a thing called schools for the mentally subnormal in Britain. This was back when eugenics was a sort of an accepted way of explaining educational, differential educational outcomes between people. By the time my dad's generation were born in the UK, these were called schools for the educationally subnormal. And what you found was that black children in particular, though it was mostly for children from less well-off backgrounds, my mic's gone off, but there we go. Though it was mostly for children from less well-off backgrounds, it was found that black children in particular were being taken out of mainstream schooling, were ending up in these schools for the educationally subnormal, which of course my dad, my uncle, many others ended up at. There's a whole host of experiences I could go into. But what I look at rather than just anecdote, because of course anecdote can be dismissed, is I place this in context of the data. So the Department for Education did a report in 2005 where they looked at the expulsion gap, and what they found was even when you account for every conceivable control factor, parental education, household income, whether or not the child has previous exclusions, whether or not the child has a criminal record, the black children were still about 3 times more likely to be expelled. Bristol and Warwick University did 2 studies where they looked at data from every single secondary school in the country, and they looked at the likelihood of a child being entered for higher tier GCSE at the same level of academic attainment, and then looked at what happens when you change the ethnicity of the child, what happens when you change the class background of the child. And what they found, interestingly, was that all of these stereotypes and biases of British society come out. That actually, the only 2 groups of children that teachers tend to overestimate their intelligence, vis-a-vis their measured intelligence, were children from India and China, so it wasn't even white children. But the gap between which white children's intelligence is underestimated, vis-a-vis their measured intelligence, and versus the gap between how much black children's intelligence is underestimated was much smaller. So the gap for black children was the largest of all of the ethnic groups in the country. And interestingly, for British West African children, it was even larger than for Caribbean children, even though British West African children actually do, in general, better in school. So this is one of the things around the world they talk about blind marking. Basically, a child's identity does affect our perception, whether we like it or not, our perception of that child's behaviour, our perception of that child's intellectual capacity, our perception of that child's place in society. Yeah, and it's coping with that and dealing with that I had to go through throughout my time in school. What I learned from school though was some of the things we needed, good things, literacy, numeracy, school broadened my horizons, but it contracted them too. I was being taught, as I said, with the special needs group and several other experiences in school, your place in society is over here, not over there. But I also learned a valuable lesson in school. Life is not fair. In my secondary school, I went to what on the face of it is sort of the poster child for sort of a liberal, multicultural, successful inner city school. Children of lords and ladies, millionaires, kids from the council estate, all in the same school. But it wasn't the kids from the council estate bringing drugs into school. But the children who were bringing drugs into school were never arrested, were never searched, and now are lawyers and barristers putting people away for taking drugs. So I learned that life is not fair. Yeah? I learned that knowledge is dangerous. For some people, a person like me being a little bit too bright and being a little bit reading beyond the curriculum was problematic. Luckily for me, I had this place. This is me when I was 5. I went to a Pan-African Saturday school. So for those who don't know, in the post-war period, British Caribbean set up about 150 black supplementary schools. Yeah, as soon as people started to realise their children were not going to be treated fairly in the British education system, or were not satisfied with the quality of the education, they set up black supplementary schools. I went to one of them called the Winnie Mandela School in Camden, and so I had this extra support my entire time through school. What I learned from Black Saturday School, don't always believe everything you're told. I learned a number of things that contradicted with what I was taught on the national curriculum. If you read my book, you'll know I go into some of them. There are multiple ways to view the world. Blackness is not synonymous with negativity. That might sound obvious when you say it, but as you can see, lots of people do not believe that, including, unfortunately, lots of young black boys. I learned a lot of pre-colonial African history, the importance of independent learning, and as my friend, the African-American scholar, one of the youngest professors in American history, M.K. Asante said, take 2 sets of notes. You do what you need to do to pass the test and get through life, but don't get sucked in by the source. Not everything you're going to learn is accurate. My other education, my stepdad was the stage manager of this beautiful place, the Hackney Empire Theatre. And so I got to see more theatre growing up than any rich kid is ever likely to see. I saw maybe 4 or 5 productions a week for about 10 years. I did the lights for the Russian circus. I've got exposed, beautiful, brilliant cultural upbringing. I actually went to watch Dave Chappelle here a couple of weeks ago. Don't know why that's important. But it's no secret that I've gone on to do some of the things that I'm doing now that I look back at this exposure, cultural exposure I had. And what I learned from that is, you can turn the mic off, because I've got quite a loud voice. So if you keep doing that, I honestly don't. You can hear me up there when I talk, can't you? Yeah, so if you want to turn the mic off, it's fine. Because I'm a pretty loud bloke anyway, so it's fine. What I learned was stagecraft, storytelling, the power of culture. Yeah, so education is not just what's going on in school. As teachers and educational practitioners, you'll know this. What's going on in a child's life outside of school, even though they're spending so much time in school, massively affects their capacity to learn or not learn. It's only now I get older, I think about going back to some of the experiences. When I was in year 7, my mum got diagnosed with very severe cancer, was supposed to die. No one in school ever asked me, was I okay? When I was 12 or 13, a friend of mine got stabbed in the barbershop. I write about this in the book. It was the first time I'd ever seen that level of violence. There was nothing available in school to say, hey, are you okay? Is that a normal thing to see? You just sort of normalise it and you move on. Even though you spend so much time in school, but what's going on out of school obviously massively affects your capacity to learn. Another place I was educated, that kid with that screw face right there, yep, that is me. That's Anton Ferdinand, in case any of you are into football. This was my West Ham United under-16s team. I was a schoolboy footballer. What did I learn from football? Self-reliance. My mum and stepdad had split up by the time I got serious at football. My mum didn't have enough money to have a car, so I took myself to training. Discipline counts for much more than talent. Yeah? Unfortunately in life, lots of the best players I ever saw did not make it, and I played with every player in the Premier League between the ages 35 and 33 that you see now. And players we played with that were better than all of them didn't make it for lack of discipline, because family circumstance wasn't right. In fact, even most of the young black boys that made it, whether they were from Peckham or Tottenham or wherever, were the kids from the stable homes, the kids whose dads were bringing them to training, the kids who had that extra support, actually. A coach of mine used to say this to me all the time: your friends ain't gonna pay your mortgage. And at the time I thought, what is this idiot talking about, right? Little did I know it was one of the greatest nuggets of wisdom I'd ever been told, right? We'd be messing around with our friends at football and they say your friends ain't going to pay your mortgage. And then some of the boys went on to earn 100 grand a week, and it was clear that they weren't going to pay everyone else's mortgage. Coping with disappointment and criticism. Football is a little too harsh. You're 12 years old, you have a bad game, your coach shouts in your face, F's and blinds at you, all of this sort of stuff. But in a sense, it toughens you up for the world, for the real society. And so there's a way in which, as an adult and a professional, I've not been scared to be criticised, and I think a lot of that came from the toughening up that I got from football. Lessons from my family and friends. Typical sort of inner city upbringing. Lots of my friends went through that path of getting expelled from school, going to PRU, going to prison, and following that to where it ends up. In fact, when I go and talk at schools today, I say to young people, every single one of my friends that got expelled from school at 12 or 13, without exception, every single one of them went to prison at some point. Yeah, every single one. And some of them didn't come from the kinds of homes that should have even been expelled in the first place. Coming back to the original, or didn't have the kinds of behaviours, rather, that I would have thought would have warranted expulsion. There was a perception that they were bad anyway. And as I mentioned earlier, some children from other more fortunate backgrounds were doing things that were worthy of expulsion, and the school looked the other way. Negative as well as positive habits accumulate. There were other young boys we grew up with who, for whatever reason, at a certain age, I think of 2 particular boys, they just decided they're not into none of that nonsense, and they're going to focus on their studies, and everyone thought it was really funny. There was a boy we played football with, for example, who, while we were doing our YTS at football, which is when you play football full-time after you leave school, he actually went back to university. He's a trauma surgeon today. Yeah, he didn't make it at football. And everyone else was like, he's gone off here, he's now Dr. Anoche. Yeah, so he understood football wasn't guaranteed. And lots of the other boys who dropped out of football, some luckily have been successful elsewhere, but others have not been so successful. It's easy to become conditioned to violence. Yeah, I wouldn't say that my friends were necessarily bad people, but their life took them in a certain direction. And it became easy to be conditioned to negative realities. There is a difference between doing wrong and being wrong, in the words of the sage DMX. We understand that when it comes to politicians. We understand it when it comes to people in positions of power. We understand it when it comes to big historical figures, yet we don't understand it to the average, in regards to the average kid on a British council estate. You do something bad, you are a bad person. That's the end of it. In 2009, I started a company called the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company. It's a music theatre production and education company. It does workshops, live events, residencies, stage productions, etc. And we've since worked at hundreds of schools across the UK, done educational residencies abroad, places like North and South Sudan, places like the Philippines, India, loads of different places around the world. And it's exposed me to lots of different things, but also give me an even greater conviction in the idea that arts education and creative education is central to personal development. It's central to academic success. This is a picture I just thought I'd insert because why not put Gandalf in the presentation. But this was our launch workshop, and Sir Ian did come down and helped us out, and it was great fun. What I learned from teaching all around the world, both in an individual capacity and as part of Hip Hop Shakespeare, the common pursuit of knowledge. What's been really depressing, I'll be honest with you, I've just come back from New Zealand and Australia, where I did a number of talks and workshops with schools out there as well, as part of my book tour, but I did Hip Hop Shakespeare stuff. And I went to a couple of schools out there that were supposed to be like tough schools in New Zealand. And the level of confidence that the children had, the willingness to speak in public, the willingness to ask questions, the kind of outgoingness that often you only see either in really, really good schools or more wealthy schools in Britain, basically. Something about British society seems to crush lots of kids at state schools' confidence in a way that we think is universal, but isn't. I've taught all over Europe, in Scandinavia, in the Caribbean. There's a school that I work with in Jamaica called Jonestown Boys. It is on the border of Rima and Denhamtown. I don't know if there are any Jamaicans in the house, but for those of you who are not, this is like the ghetto of the ghetto of the ghetto. The army is literally has tanks in the neighbourhood. That's how tough the area is. And when I say to the young boys, what do you want to be when you're older? The first kid's response was marine biologist. The next kid was like surgeon. The next, because the Jamaican school system actually is based on the old British school system, it's selective. Ironically, a child from the ghetto in Jamaica can aspire to be the Minister of Education. In fact, the former Minister of Education comes from a rural, poor family. And so you have a situation in which I find it really interesting and ironic that a child growing up in what is essentially a low-intensity civil war zone can have really high educational aspirations. Yet we have, on the face of it, facilities most children in the world couldn't even imagine. Often educational aspiration can be crushed. Education should be fun and challenging. It seems that we still have this sort of Victorian notion that if something is fun, it isn't really difficult. And when you talk to people who do quantum physics or rocket science, some of the hardest endeavors in the world, they enjoy that stuff. They make it fun. And if you read a lot of the popular science books, the whole way in which the great scientists have made careers is communicating things in ways that are fun and interesting. Really, really difficult subjects. I would argue that if rocket science can be conveyed in a way that is simple and fun and entertaining and interesting and using metaphor or music or analogy, then other forms of education certainly can too. The power of music. All around the world, music has been something that I've seen as united people and been a force to bring people together. What can teachers do? Brutal honesty. There was a teacher at my school that used to say to me, middle-aged white guy, sociology teacher, he said to me, hey, you're a young black boy, lots of people want you to fail. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to give in, you're going to play the stereotype, or you're going to succeed? He didn't lie to me about the way the world worked. He didn't tell me it was all fair and everyone was going to give me an equal chance. Neither did my parents, by the way, which was lucky for me. My parents didn't bring me up with the delusion that the world is fair. If they did, I might have started bringing drugs to school like the kids of lords and ladies, and I would have got a rude awakening because I was getting searched by the police on the way to school, whether I did anything wrong or not. So brutal honesty about the way the world is. Being conscious that we're all biased. We've got to a stage in life where people are so afraid of being biased that we deny that we're biased, which is obviously ridiculous. people see a child that looks like their own child and they are more likely to identify with that child than other children. Let's not be absurd. 1. 2, the very language we speak makes us biased. There are concepts that exist in English that do not exist in other languages around the world. There are concepts that exist in other languages that do not exist in English. I'm running low for time, so I'll give you just one example. In the Swahili languages of East Africa, there is a word called Ubuntu, and that word translates to roughly, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. Can you see that there is no equivalent concept in the English language? Realise your brilliance and impact. I think it's hard, especially as the state seems intent on making life more and more difficult for public sector workers, reducing their pay, while not reducing MPs' own pay, obviously. The impact a good teacher has on the future of a child's life, as I mentioned about Anne Taylor at the beginning, she's affected my life till today. And so I think for great teachers, never underestimate, you are going to affect literally decisions this person makes and where they end up in 50 years' time. And never underestimate that. The last thing we'll touch on before I go and sit down and do my questions, what's the relationship between school and violence? Obviously, I'm not laying all of the blame for what's going on in the streets, or even any of the blame, because there isn't. What's interesting is some of the counter-arguments people have brought to me. When I say social indicators, that's a factual statement. I don't say causes, because of course nothing can cause me to kill you. But there are certain indicators that make that more likely, and a huge one of which is expulsion from school. Yeah, about half of the children, people in prison in Britain today, were expelled from school as children. That doesn't mean the expulsion caused them to go to prison, but what it means is, the way I would describe it is this. There are basically 3 sets of young people in any poor area in Britain. This is my sort of rough analogy. There are what I'm going to call the 80% kids. Dad's a plumber, mum's a nurse, whatever it is, regular home. That's 80% of the children. Very low risk of violence, very low risk of problem. Then there are what we call, then there's the next section of kids, which I'm going to say are roughly 15%. This is the 50-50 children. This is the group I was in. This is the group of children who enough good has happened in their life, that with just the right encouragement and the right push, they can rejoin the 80% group. But enough bad has happened, if you push them, they can go in the other direction. And this is the last group. This is the 5% group. This is the group, parents are in prison, or suffered severe trauma, or it's been an accident, or someone's been killed. It could be any whole host of reasons. But this set of children is coming to school with particular sets of problems that are unique to them. And often, in my area, the 4 or 5 boys who we knew were from that kind of family were all the first kids to get expelled. Then what happens is, a bunch of kids from the 15% group and the 80% group get expelled, and they end up in the PRU with the 5% kids, and they have a choice now. Step up your level of badness, or be crushed. And so I think it's in that context we have to be really, really strict about, there needs to be sort of, I would argue, a universal code about what constitutes an expellable offence. It can't just be GCSEs that come in, we don't think these kids are going to do that well, so get them out of the school before they bring the league table down. Yeah? There sort of has to be a way in which there's a sort of universal criteria for removing children from school. And I would argue, last point I'll make, even on a financial level, for any people are more concerned with tax efficiency, sort of making the argument in a sort of right-wing terms, there is a cost implication to every expelled child, obviously, in PRU, in average arrest record, in eventual prison time. If it is significantly cheaper to provide schools with extra support staff to keep those children in school, surely that's the option we should go for, rather than the inevitable cost that comes out at the other end. So I think it's also about that. Thank you.